Welcome to the Holyland Dispatch podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Holyland Dispatch podcast. Today, I'll try to address another one of those lies the Israeli left perpetuates and the global left happily picks up on. The ridiculous claim that Netanyahu was or is a divisive and inciting leader who constantly slanders or uses divisive speech towards his political opponents. A shortish video made its way to my social media stream and gave me the opportunity to start formulating an answer to those bogus claims. We will start with a riddle. What do fact-speaking leftist pundits on American TV and Snow White have in common? Neither are real. Well, you could make the case that dressing up as Snow White brings her to existence, but you can't make those clowns on TV tell the truth. John Oliver is no different. It seems like you can't go through a single week without catching those shills speaking blatant lies in order to smear their mortal enemies, people who think different to them. It was brought to my attention that Mr. Oliver went on yet another anti-Bibi rant. I'm not surprised, but I did watch it, and you know what? It's time for a little monologue of my own. I'd share the video here, but that would cause this video to be blocked, so instead you can follow the link to the post on X. It should come up on the screen and I'll have it in the comments below. Here's what Oliver had to say, and I quote, "He made his name campaigning against the historic Oslo Accords. They famously laid out a framework for Israel negotiating peace with the Palestinians, and Netanyahu in particular railed against the prime minister who signed those accords on Israel's behalf, Yitzhak Rabin. Bibi went scorched earth, even speaking at an infamous rally where the crowd burned images of Rabin in a Nazi uniform and chanted for his death. Just a month later, he was assassinated by a far-right extremist. Many blamed Netanyahu for stoking the anger that led to that assassination, including Rabin's widow." Oliver then cuts to a part of an interview with Leah Rabin. The interviewer asks, "To what extent do you blame Mr. Netanyahu for what has happened?" And Mrs. Rabin answers, "I blame him. In rally in Kikar Zion in Jerusalem, they showed him in the uniform of the Nazi," her words. So Bibi Netanyahu now can say from here to eternity that he didn't support it and didn't agree with it, but he was there and he didn't stop it. Then Oliver continues, "Right. Now Netanyahu denies inciting political violence, and in his defense, it's not like he was filmed leading a mock funeral procession before Rabin's death with a coffin labeled "Rabin kills Zionism" in Hebrew. Except, of course, he was very much filmed doing exactly that." He then shows a clip and says, "There is Netanyahu right in front of one of the bluntest and most unfortunate metaphors imaginable." And he wraps things up by, "Honestly, the only way that could get any more on the nose is if he held a sign reading plausible deniability and burned that too." Wow, zinger. Now, allow me to break this absolute drivel down piece by piece. First, let's talk about those Oslo Accords where Israel was negotiating peace with Palestinians, shall we? It's true, Israel was negotiating peace. The problem was that the other participant was not. The other participant in these quote-unquote peace negotiation was merely bargaining the next phase of his hostile takeover. And yes, Bibi did object to those agreements, much like more than half of the population. I'll admit that I was still part of those who supported the two-state delusion back then. Our eyes were wide shut to all the horrific terror attack, the double talk and deceptive behavior of our peace partner Yasser Arafat, who spoke from two sides of his mouth. These Oslo Accords were passed in the Knesset on the back of a single vote coming from a defecting member who was bribed with a Mitsubishi car. Next, Johnny Boy says, Bibi went scorched earth. If by scorched earth you mean exercising his democratic right and duty to speak in public against a policy he strongly objected to, then yeah, I guess he did. Now, John, since I was actually here and you weren't, I know that that was all he did. He spoke at a few rallies, he spoke at the Knesset, he went around the country gathering support. You know, John, what politicians do. Let's continue. Bibi went scorched earth, even speaking at an infamous rally where the crowd burned images of Rabin in a Nazi uniform and chanted for his death. Just a month later, he was assassinated by a far-right extremist. I'm going to spend some time on this last bit, so you, John, can get a little educated, and so other listeners won't fall for the same ignorant traps you fell into. Let's start with the images of Rabin in a Nazi uniform. First, it was, and still is, an abhorrent behavior, which is not excused by anything. Now that we made that clear, let's just mention the little fact that you didn't mention for some reason. You know, that those images were printed and distributed by a Shin Bet operative. Let me give you some context, John. We've known for a while now that a number of Shin Bet operatives were sent to settlements in Judea and Samaria with a mandate to incite the local population to violence. They embedded themselves in some communities, even marrying into some families in order to complete their cover. This is not a conspiracy. This is well documented and investigated fact. The vast lack of support for Oslo necessitated a diversion. And what's better than to flash a floodlight on those violent far-right settlers, eh? The problem was, and still is, that, well, they are actually not violent people by any standard. For the most part, the incitement worked on a small number of individuals, and some of the action taken against Arabs mostly was actually taken by those operatives themselves. I know, John, you probably didn't bother to check before you spoke. After all, facts, truth, those are foreign concepts in your circles. So here I am, happy to help. Furthermore, that irresponsible Shin Bet jerk was met with rejection by most people he tried handing those despicable images to. They looked at him perplexed and told him where to shove those images. But don't let that little side note stop you from bursting a vein. Now, the chants in those demonstrations were not nice. Yes, inside these huge crowds there were a negligible minority, mostly encouraged by the Shin Bet operatives who chanted death to Rabin. Do you know how we know about these people? Because TV crews went up close and personal and recorded those few who were completely swallowed by the majority. That is a lie that you help perpetuate, a lie based on staining a huge number of people who absolutely did not chant that. Eventually, a month later, Yitzhak Rabin was indeed murdered. I was 22 when that happened, and I cried like a baby. It was unforgiven, and still is. Do you know, John, who was one of Yigal Amir's best buddies? Do you know, John, who was whispering in Yigal Amir's ear? Do you know, John, who was goading and coaxing Rabin's would-be assassin to action? Yes, John, 12 points. It was indeed a Shin Bet operative. Not far-right extremists, not crazy rabbis like the Israeli Pravda reported, not violent settlers. In fact, Amir was not a settler at all. He's from Herzliya. So no, John, your attempt, which is not original like most of the nonsense you say on your show, to tie between a demonstration and the murder is pathetic. Yigal Amir was not affected by a demonstration. He was incited, pushed and challenged by someone who were supposed to help divert attention from the ever-growing objections to the Oslo Accords and onto a fictional libel against the opposition. Let's continue. Many blamed Netanyahu for stoking the anger that led to that assassination, including Rabin's widow. Yes, John, many blame Netanyahu. Okay, many, very likely more, don't. What exactly is your point? Oh, I get it. The widow of the murdered prime minister was blaming him. That's very surprising. Who would have thought that the widow of a person who was murdered would blame his most prominent opposition leader? That really caught me off guard, John. John, take a breath. Yes, I've lived through this period and I was here. You know, unlike you. I've seen it and heard it. He didn't stop it. Let's watch a bit of the very same demonstration. You know, John, the one none of you inciting lefties ever show.
הקריאות והנאצות כלפי רבין הביכו את מנהיג הליכוד ביבי נתניהו, שניסה ללא הועיל לתעל את זעם ההמונים לאפיקים תרבותיים יותר.
לא עם הקריאות האלה! תירגעו! לא עם הקריאות האלה!
Oh, you don't speak Hebrew. Let me help you with that. Netanyahu over the loudspeakers saying very clearly, not with these calls. Calm down. Not with these calls. Because Netanyahu, as opposed to how you love to paint him, is not a supporter of violent discourse. So no, John, he didn't stop them. But he did what was expected of a leader in his position. He asked them to stop. Other than going down into the crowd and making citizen arrest, what exactly was Netanyahu supposed to do? And now, let's tackle your lowest and most dishonest display of eye-rolling. Right. Now, Netanyahu denies inciting political violence, and in his defense, it's not like he was filmed leading a mock funeral procession before Rabin's death with a coffin labeled Rabin Kills Zionism in Hebrew. Except, of course, he was very much filmed doing exactly that. He then shows a clip and says, there is Netanyahu right in front of one of the bluntest and most unfortunate metaphors imaginable. Again, let's take a breath here, John, and ask ourselves, what are we seeing? Yes, we see Netanyahu walking with demonstrators. Behind him, indeed, a fairly distasteful use of a coffin. Now, what you, John, tried to create here is a link between the image of the coffin and the heinous murder that took place later on. You wanted to plant the visual of this coffin, then jumps to Rabin's murder, making it seem like cause and effect, like causation or correlation. The problem, John, is that we're not quite as stupid as you seem to believe we are. While I agree that a coffin in a demonstration is distasteful, that was all it was. What was written on that coffin? It says, Rabin kills Zionism. Okay. Zionism is the sentiment, the striving and action toward the establishment of an independent state for the Jews in their historic homeland of Israel. Rabin signed an agreement that gives away large portions of said homeland to others. So, the demonstrators believed, with some very clear logic, that by signing this agreement, Rabin dealt a death blow to Zionism. So, what exactly is, how did you call it, one of the bluntest and most unfortunate metaphors imaginable about it? Again, taste aside, What exactly is the problem with stating that the Oslo Accord and the people who signed it are killing Zionism? Why the outrage, John? Why should Netanyahu disassociate himself from this message? Well, except for it being a mortal sin by being a different opinion to yours. And he wraps things up by, honestly, the only way that could get any more on the nose is if he held a sign reading plausible deniability and burned that too. Wow, zinger. Well, John, I hate to break it to you, buddy. I can think of a few things that are actually worse. Since you seem to despise coffins, and hey, I'm with you on that, let me show you a clip. Now here, John, in this clip, there's correlation. The coffin on the one hand, and the images on the big screen. Netanyahu and Minister Levin, who led the attempt to reform the judiciary. You know, a crime that according to this singer might warrant a certain penalty. But please, don't go on a rant against Shlomi. He's from the correct camp, the human rights camp, the democracy first camp, the camp that expects you to be democratic as long as you do it his way. And tell me, John, what might you find inside a coffin? That's right, buddies. Here are a few peaceful and cultured leftist demonstrators outside of that awful Ben-Gvir's house. Because nothing says moderate, humanist, mild-tempered, and overall not psychotic person than, well, that. Do you remember, John, how earlier I showed you Netanyahu pleading with demonstrators to avoid using violent language? Let's see one of Israel's prominent opposition leaders, Yair Golan, dealing with some calls to him.
מקיים קשרים עם קטר, הוא בוגד במדינת ישראל. בואו אני אספר לכם מי מחרב את ישראל. בואו אני אספר לכם. זה שבמשך 3 עשורים מלבס שנאה, זה שהלך אחרי ארון מתים עם ממשלת רבין עליו, הוא זה שמוביל אתכם, מעוור את העיניים שלכם וגורם לכם לעשות רק דבר אחד, לשנוא, לשנוא, לשנוא ולשנוא. זה מה שאתם יודעים.
Well, there's a calm, cool, collected, level-headed individual calmly calling Netanyahu a traitor. And while he's democratically inciting, he blames Netanyahu for incitement. While he tells the crowd that all they know is to hate, and brings up that very same coffin you did, John, he expresses his hateful messages at the people of Sderot who went through October 7th. These are the people he preaches to. Ready for more, John?
לראות מי אני פוגש את האפס, העבד כי ימלוך, רץ עבד כי ימלוך, קורא למשטרה, נכנס במפגינים, אפס, עבד כי ימלוך, נרוץ אחריך כל החיים, לא יהיה לך שקט, שנייה אחת, שנייה לא יהיה לך שקט, שנייה לא יהיה לך שקט עד סוף חייך, עבד כי ימלוך, אפס, אתה קורא לשוטרים, כן, אני סיירת גולני, לא אתה, אפס, אפס, אני ארוץ אחריך עד סוף ימיך. סמרטוטים מתעייפים מהר, עבד כי ימלוך סמרטוט, אתה חושב שבריצה תעף אותי? אני אלמד אותך מה זה סרט גולני. אפס עבד! למי אתה קורא לשוטרים כל החיים שלך? אפס מאופס! אפס מאופס! עד סוף ימיך נרדוף אותך! שנה טובה חמוד! עד סוף ימיך נרדוף אותך! פשיסט!
Meet Amichai Shikli, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, on a nice jog with his 7-year-old son. The video is taken by one of those professional protesters you love so much. You can guess which side of the political spectrum he comes from. This pure soul chases the minister and his 7-year-old boy, cussing, taunting, promising to chase him to the end of his life, and other such pearls of wisdom. How about an actual attempt to cause Netanyahu harm? Okay, let me give you a tip here on how to counter this one. The leftist media here painted this firing of lighting bombs on Netanyahu's residence in Caesarea, injuring a security guard, a prank. You know, boys will be boys. I remember when you went on that rant that day. Oh, hold on a second. You didn't. Perhaps the only way your Bibi derangement syndrome can get any more on the nose is if you'd hold up a sign saying unbiased punditry and burn that like you did your credibility with your hate. That's it for today, folks. Thanks again for joining us on the Holyland Dispatch podcast. God bless.
Da 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 da.